Can you subscribe to my new channel for support purposes? The children constantly called him a freak and made fun of him. Kale's skin was covered in ancient markings belonging to his father's mummy lineage. These markings not only made him different from the outside, but also symbolized the power he carried within him. His eyes shone like his mother's bright blue eyes, but this shine was perceived more as a threat to the people around him. Being excluded, abandoned, and despised every day caused a deep anger to build up inside Kale. However, he had learned to control that anger. Over time, this exclusion had pushed him into the wilderness. Kale had begun to spend more time in the forests outside the village. He felt more comfortable there. No one looked at him strangely. However, this loneliness had created an emptiness inside Kale. He was trying to learn who he was and why he was so different. Kale's greatest fear was that his inner power, which he could not control, would one day explode. Since he was little, he had felt a strange energy in his hands when he was angry. Although this energy made him feel powerful at times, it also felt dangerous and scary. Kale knew that if he could not control this power, it could harm both himself and those around him. However, he had no idea about the source of this power. This power within Kale had become more apparent in his youth. When the children who were making fun of him cornered Kale in the town square one day, the anger that had accumulated inside him exploded. Before Kale could fully control what he was doing, a sudden wave of energy from his hands knocked the children who were bothering him to the ground. This incident caused great fear in the village. People thought that Kale was carrying a curse and ostracized him even more. After this incident, Kale could not find a place for himself in the village. Now everyone stayed away from him. Even his family looked at him with fear. Kale knew that this was not his fault, but the loneliness that came from not being able to control the power inside him became even heavier. He did not know what to do with this power. This power was like a curse, as he didn't know how to use it. Kale had to find a solution. One night, while he was wandering alone in the forest again, his mother came to mind. When he remembered Anara, the thought of her abandonment tore deep inside Kale. He could never understand why his mother had abandoned him, but all that remained of his mother was his desire to embark on a journey to find her power. Kale decided that he had to learn who he was and what this power meant. These thoughts led Kale to the distant mountains. A huge mountain far from the village was a sacred place among the local people. No one dared to go to that mountain, but Kale's curiosity led him to this forbidden area. He had a feeling that something was waiting for him deep within the mountain. Perhaps he would find a clue that would shape his destiny. Kale left the village and started walking towards the mountain. The mountain had a high and dark appearance, and it took hours to climb to its peak. Throughout the climb, Kale felt the power inside him pulling him towards this path. As he got closer to the peak, he started to notice strange symbols and signs on the mountain. These symbols seemed to know Kale and were waiting for him. When he reached the peak of the mountain, Kale could not believe his eyes. Behind the peak, there was a cave hidden among the rocks. The cave entrance was covered with ancient signs. These signs resembled the mummy signs on Kale's body. Kale immediately realized that this cave was no ordinary place. He felt that a part of his destiny was hidden inside. When he stepped into the cave, it was dark and silent. However, as he moved forward, he saw a light coming from the depths of the cave. He continued to walk deeper into the cave to investigate the source of this light. Finally, at the deepest point of the cave, he came across a figure, Master Orion. Orion was an old man, but Kale could tell right away that he was no ordinary man. There was deep wisdom in his eyes. When Orion saw Kale, he knew who he was. The markings on Kale's body told Orion that Kale's lineage was part of an ancient legend. Orion knew who Kale was and what the power within him meant. "I have been waiting," Orion said quietly. "This cave was going to bring you here. Your destiny begins here, Kale." Kale looked at the man's face in surprise. "How do you know you are waiting for me? Who am I? What is this power within me? I cannot control it. Everything is about to fall apart." Orion understood Kale's anxiety. He approached him and placed his hand on his shoulder. "You have great power within you, Kale. It is a legacy from both your mother and your father. You carry the balance between two worlds. The ancient power of your father's mummy lineage and the alien bloodline from your mother make you very powerful. But this power is something that must be controlled. If you cannot learn it, it will consume you." Kale listened to Orion's words. He felt that this old man could help him. "How can I control this power?" he asked desperately. Orion looked at Kale with a slight smile. "This will be a long journey, but I will guide you. You will learn martial arts, battle strategies, and ancient wisdom. But first, you must find balance within yourself. Power becomes true power only when you can control it." Orion began to train Kale. At first, the training was physically and mentally difficult. Orion taught Kale not only martial arts, but also how to find inner balance. Kale's anger and power were uncontrollable, but with Orion's guidance, he began to learn how to use this power. Every day, in a large area outside the cave, Orion taught Kale the techniques of war. Kale learned quickly, The physical durability of his father's mummy bloodline made him strong as a warrior, while the intelligence and quick thinking he inherited from his mother made him a strategically sharp leader. But the training was not just physical. Orion taught Kale to embark on an inner journey. Kale had both light and darkness within him. These two opposing forces were constantly at odds with him. Orion balanced these two forces and helped Kale find inner peace. Over time, Kale began to accept these contradictions within himself and control them. Orion gave Kale this advice: a leader rules not only with his physical strength, but also with his mind and heart. Your destiny is great, but to guide it, you must know what your heart desires. Kale tried to understand this advice. His father's legacy made him a powerful warrior, but he also longed for peace from his mother. Kale realized that he could be both a warrior and a leader, but he understood that this had to be balanced. Under Orion's guidance, Kale was beginning to have the power to determine his own destiny. After years of training, Kale had become a master warrior. Orion saw the potential in Kale and gave him the most important lessons on the path to leadership. But Orion had grown old and had given Kale everything he could. One day, Orion gave Kale his final lesson and said these words: "My time is up, Kale. Your time has come. You are not only a warrior, but also the one who will bring peace between the two worlds. When the power you inherited from your father is combined with the wisdom your mother left you, nothing can stop you." After giving this final piece of advice, Orion quietly passed away. Kale felt the pain of losing his master, but he also understood what it meant to be a leader on his own. What Orion taught him had made Kale a strong and balanced leader. After his master's death, Kale decided to leave Vahara. He no longer had a place there. He would shape his own destiny as a warrior and leader. The hostility of both Anara and Xerath towards him was no longer an obstacle for Kale. Kale would embark on a journey to stop the war between the two planets and to live out his legacy. The villagers in Vahara began to respect Kale when they saw his new form. He was no longer just an outcast. Kale had matured both physically and mentally, becoming a powerful leader. Kale began to build his armies and gather his own people. His goal was not just revenge. Kale would fight to maintain the balance between the two planets and to keep his mother and father's memory alive. Of course, let's continue the story by focusing on Kale's quest for revenge, detailing the process of building his armies, his war strategies against Anara and Xerath, and his personal development in this process. In the final section, we will also delve deeply into Kale's confrontation with his own destiny, his struggle to establish peace, and his ultimate goal. As the years passed in Vahara, Kale's power and leadership skills began to spread rapidly. The training and mastery he received from Orion had made him not only a powerful warrior but also a charismatic leader in the eyes of the people. Kale's childhood as an outcast and despised child taught him to understand the pain of the people at the bottom of society. This experience strengthened his leadership even more. Kale began to travel beyond Vahara to other galaxies and planets. He came into contact with people who lacked advanced technology, who were marginalized and exploited. The people who fled the power of Xerath and Anara, who were oppressed under their rule, heeded Kale's call. Kale slowly began to build an army. However, this army was more than just an ordinary military force. Kale gained his allies with a leadership that did not rely solely on military strategies. He gained their trust, loyalty, and respect. Kale's army was made up of people from different planets and cultures. This diversity, combined with Kale's strategic intelligence, provided a great advantage. Kale combined the advanced technology of Xerath, the ancient magic of Anara, and the cultural knowledge of other planets to create a powerful and unique army. These people from different worlds had come together for the first time under Kale's leadership. Kale reminded them that everyone was fighting for a common goal: intergalactic justice, freedom, and peace. Under Kyle's leadership, his army was made up not only of warriors but also of scientists, strategists, and diplomats. Kale always knew that wars could not be won with physical strength alone. With his intelligence and strategic thinking, he sought ways to defeat his enemies both militarily and diplomatically. The belief in peace he inherited from his mother and the fighting spirit inherited from his father were balanced under Kale's leadership. Kale decided to head to Anara first to avenge his mother and father. Despite Anara being his father's home, Kale had never felt at home in this world. To honor the memory of his father Anubis and his mother's sacrifice, he promised the people of Anara freedom from the curse of immortality. This curse had turned them into zombie-like beings for centuries. They were neither fully alive nor dead. Before Kale attacked Anara, he contacted some of the people there. He offered them a choice. After his father's death and the end of the wars, the people of Anara had been forced to live as slaves. Kale promised them peace and freedom. But this peace would only be possible when the Mummy King's rule ended and they were freed from the curse of immortality. While this offer inspired hope in some of the people of Anara, it also created great fear in others. Although the curse of immortality had caused them terrible pain, giving up immortality meant facing death. Kale used this internal conflict to expose the weaknesses within Anara. Against Xerath's technology, Anara's army, which relied on magical power, was very strong. But Kale's army acted from a different perspective in terms of both strategy and intelligence. Kale's plan was simple: weaken Ankara from within and rally the people to his side. When the attack on Ankara began, Kale did not just wage a physical war. He also waged a war in the people's minds and hearts. The people, who suffered under the Mummy King's curse of immortality, could not resist the idea of peace and freedom promised by Kale. Kale fueled this internal conflict even more and soon weakened the resistance within Ankara. The people began to side with Kale. Finally, Kale entered the Ankara palace. He confronted the Mummy King, who sat on his father's throne. This encounter was not only a physical war, but also a mental and emotional struggle. The Mummy King looked old and tired in front of his son. The immortality curse that had lasted for centuries had consumed the king from the inside. "We fought for you," the Mummy King said in a tired voice. "Immortality was our legacy. But you came to destroy that legacy," Kale answered with determination in his eyes. "This is not a legacy, it is a curse. I am not here to avenge my father, but to bring peace to your people." At these words, the Mummy King bowed to Kale, as if accepting the weariness of the years. The king accepted Kale's power and leadership. As the son of Anubis, Kale had freed the people of Ankara from immortality and given them true freedom. Kale's victory was a turning point for the people of Ankara. Their immortality curse was broken, and Kale brought the people together to rebuild in peace. Ankara entered a new era under Kale's leadership. After liberating Ankara, Kale's next target was Zerath. Zerath was the planet responsible for his father's death and forced to follow his mother throughout her life. King Karan was at the head of Zerath, and Kale was determined to remove the tyrant from his throne. But Zerath was not limited to Karan alone. The planet's technology, armies, and political power were Kale's greatest obstacles. Kale did not plan a direct attack on Zerath. With his intelligence combined with the strategic thinking Orion had taught him, Kale decided to use diplomatic and psychological warfare techniques. The people of Zerath relied on their technological superiority, but Kale knew their weaknesses. In Zerath, some of the people were unhappy with Karan's rule. Karan's oppressive regime did not allow the people to think freely, constantly motivating them to fight. Kale began secretly contacting opposition leaders on Zerath. He told them that Zerath could be destroyed from within and without, and the people could find peace. Although Zerath was a technologically advanced planet, a large portion of its people longed for an end to the war and freedom from Karan's oppressive rule. Kale formed secret alliances to gain the support of the people while planning an attack on Zerath. By infiltrating Zerath's technological infrastructure, Kale's army was able to disable the planet's internal defenses. Zerath's technological power began to collapse like a castle of cards. Finally, Kale entered the palace of King Karan in the capital of Zerath. Karan had learned of his daughter's relationship with Anubis years ago and had developed a deep hatred for Kale. When he heard that Kale was coming, he went berserk with rage. Karan mobilized his armies, but thanks to Kale's intelligence and strategic planning, the attempt failed. When Kale confronted Karan, he was not thirsting for revenge. He wanted to honor the memory of his mother and father, but war was not the final solution Kale sought. Kale spoke these words to Karan: "This war began because of your greed. My mother and father suffered because of your desire for domination. But my goal is not revenge, but peace. I will not shed more blood by trying to rule Zerath." Karan was stunned by Kale's words. Instead of vengeance, there was a determination in the young man's eyes that came with peace. Karan tried to attack Kale, but Kale overpowered him. King Karan's reign was over. Kale promised the people of Zerath peace and freedom. The people followed him, trusting in Kale's intelligence and leadership. With Karan's oppressive regime over, the people of Zerath had their first real freedom. After Kale conquered Zerath and ended Karan's rule, he ushered in a period of peace between the galaxies. Both Ankara and Zerath were now united under Kale's leadership. Kale had won the war not only physically, but also in minds and hearts. Kale worked to eliminate the devastating effects of the war by creating an intergalactic peace treaty. He established a system where people could trust each other, where different cultures and races could live together in peace. Under Kale's leadership, peoples across the galaxy entered a period of freedom and peace they had never seen before. As the wars between Zerath and Ankara ended, Kale's inner journey also came to an end. He had become not only a warrior, but also a symbol of intergalactic peace. But Kale was a lonely leader. Although he had brought peace to his people, he was still searching for something to fill the void inside him. One day, Kale returned to Vahara. He remembered all the teachings Orion had given him. He realized that finding inner peace was possible, not only by establishing peace outside, but also by resolving the conflicts within his own heart. Kale had accepted his own destiny and become the true leader of the balance between the two worlds. One day in Vahara, Kale encountered a former student of Orion, Lyra. Lyra was Orion's daughter and had become a recluse after the death of her father. When Kale met Lyra, he felt a deep connection with her. Lyra reminded him of what his father had taught him, and in this woman, Kale found something he had long lost: love. Kale and Lyra fell in love. This love symbolized a new beginning for Kyle. Lyra strengthened his faith in both Kale's spirit and his leadership. Together, they worked to maintain intergalactic peace and to keep Orion's teachings alive. After Kale and Lyra got married, they had triplets. These children began a new era in Kale's life. The three children each represented a different world and culture. These children, one human, one mummy, and one alien, became the true symbol of intergalactic peace. Kale taught his children not only how to be a leader, but also how valuable peace was. After Kale established intergalactic peace, a period of harmony and balance began between the peoples. Now the wars had ended, and the peoples had learned to live together. Kale's legacy was not only a physical victory, but also a victory won in the hearts. Kale continued to lead his children and his people. His legacy continued for generations as a symbol of intergalactic peace and justice. Under Kyle's leadership, Orion's teachings became a living legacy. Intergalactic wars were replaced by a future full of peace and harmony. Kyle's journey was not only a journey to find his own inner balance, but also became a legend where intergalactic peace and love prevailed. The people never forgot Kale's name, and under his leadership, the galaxies learned to live in peace like never before. Don't forget to subscribe.